Imagine a man so powerful that he didn't just run a criminal empire, he ran an entire country. He controlled judges, politicians, even police forces. He funded hospitals, built entire neighborhoods, and won the hearts of the people. But at the same time, he unleashed chaos across an entire continent. This wasn't just a cartel boss. This was a man who waged war on his own government, evaded capture for decades, and left behind a legacy that still haunts the world today. This is the true story of Pablo Escobar, the man who didn't just break the system, he owned it. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born into a world that had already decided his fate. His father was a humble farmer. His mother was a schoolteacher. They lived in a small village just outside Medellin, a city known for its deep class divide. On one side there was wealth, powerful landowners, foreign businessmen, and politicians lived in lavish estates high in the hills, away from the struggles of the working class. They wore tailored suits, drove imported cars, and sipped coffee in pristine plazas, never having to think about where their next meal would come from. They controlled the banks, the factories, and the land. To them, Medellin was a paradise. But on the other side, Medellin was a war zone of poverty. The poor lived in barrios, makeshift shanty towns clinging to the edges of the city, built from scrap metal, wood, and discarded bricks. Families crammed into tiny one-room homes with no running water, no electricity, no security. The streets were filled with shoeless children, beggars and hustlers doing anything to survive. Gangs and corrupt police officers ruled the slums, demanding bribes, stealing from the desperate, and punishing anyone who refused to play by their rules. The gap between rich and poor wasn't just wide, it was a canyon. And Pablo Escobar? He was born on the wrong side of it. From the very start, he never wanted to be poor. His mother dreamed that her son would rise through education. She pushed him in school, hoping he would use knowledge to escape the crushing poverty that surrounded them. But Pablo wasn't interested in books or in rules, he was interested in power. And in Medellin, power wasn't earned, it was taken. In the 1960s, it was a city of hustlers, smugglers, and survivors. People stole to feed their families. They cheated to stay alive. And every kid in the slums learned one thing early. If you wanted something, you had to take it. Pablo Escobar learned this lesson faster than most. By the age of 10, he was already running scams. He stole gravestones from cemeteries, sanded off the names, and resold them to smugglers who flipped them for profit. He made counterfeit diplomas and IDs, charging desperate people for fake credentials. He stole radios, bicycles, and resold them to street vendors. But Escobar wasn't just another petty thief. Even as a kid, he thought bigger. At 15, he pulled his first real scam. He and his gang stole a dozen motorcycles from rich neighborhoods in Medellin. Instead of selling them off right away, they dismantled them piece by piece. They rebuilt the parts into new bikes and sold them back to the original owners. Escobar made his first real money, and once he got a taste of it, he never wanted to stop. By the time Escobar was 16, he wasn't just a hustler anymore, he was a leader. He had a crew of young thieves and smugglers working under him. He learned how to bribe cops to look the other way. He started dipping into Medellin's growing black market trade. Then, he met his first real mentor, Alvaro Prieto. Prieto was a local crime boss, running the contraband trade in the city. He taught Escobar how to smuggle liquor, cigarettes, and stolen goods across borders. He showed him the real money wasn't in selling, it was in controlling the entire operation. Escobar listened. He watched. And then, he started making his own moves. By his late teens, he had contacts in the black market, corrupt police on his payroll, and an understanding of power few people his age had. But he wanted more. He wasn't satisfied being a small-time street boss. He wanted real power. He wanted to own Medellin. And then in the early 1970s, he found the perfect way to do it. In order for me to keep making videos, I would appreciate it if you could subscribe and like this video for the YouTube algorithm. In the early 1970s, Medellin was changing. The city was becoming a key stop for smuggling routes between South America and the US. Cocaine, once a rare and expensive drug, was about to explode onto the global market. A few traffickers in Colombia were experimenting with large-scale production. Escobar saw his moment. And his first move? He started as a transporter, smuggling cocaine shipments for existing cartels. He used his connections with corrupt police to move drugs undetected. He watched how the business worked and learned fast. Then he made the smartest decision of his life. Instead of just transporting the drugs, he wanted to control the entire supply chain. He partnered with drug chemists, dealers, and smugglers. He set up his own cocaine labs deep in the Colombian jungles. He didn't just want a piece of the business, he wanted all of it. By the mid-1970s, the world was changing. The US was facing a new drug epidemic: cocaine. Demand for pure, high-quality cocaine was exploding in Miami, New York, and Los Angeles. Colombian traffickers were experimenting with large-scale production. Pablo Escobar didn't just see an opportunity, he saw an empire waiting to be built. At first, he was just a middleman. He worked with existing smugglers, moving shipments into the US. He studied how cocaine was processed, transported, and sold. He learned which American crime syndicates were buying and how much they were willing to pay. But Escobar wasn't interested in just being another smuggler. He wanted to own the entire system. Within just a few years, Pablo Escobar went from being a small-time smuggler to running the most efficient drug production system in history. Most criminals focus on one piece of the puzzle. Escobar, he controlled everything. Step 1. Control the supply. Escobar bought out coca farms in Peru and Bolivia, ensuring a constant supply of raw material. He built his own processing labs, hiring the best chemists to refine cocaine into its purest form. He paid farmers double what they were making with traditional crops, ensuring loyalty. Step 2. Building a smuggling empire. He created a fleet of transport vehicles, including planes, boats, and even submarines. He established hidden airstrips in remote jungle locations. He developed secret smuggling routes that stretched from South America to the US. Escobar's operation was unlike anything law enforcement had ever seen. Step 3. Flooding the market. He targeted Miami first, the US city with the highest demand for cocaine. He established partnerships with American mafia groups, ensuring safe distribution. He kept his prices lower than the competition, making Medellin cocaine the most sought-after product on the market. By the early 1980s, the Medellin cartel was supplying 80% of the world's cocaine, 15 tons of cocaine shipped every single day, $420 million in weekly profits, an entire global market controlled by one man. And with all that money, Escobar didn't just buy mansions and cars, he bought power. This allowed him to control Colombia. Most drug lords hide in the shadows. Pablo Escobar? He stepped into the spotlight. He controlled politicians, judges, and military commanders. He paid off police officers and turned them into his personal security force. He built hospitals, schools, and housing projects, making him a hero to the poor. But was it generosity, or was it all part of a larger plan? The truth was simple. Escobar didn't just use violence to gain power. He used money. Escobar's bribes weren't just payments, they were investments. He didn't just hand out stacks of cash. He made sure every official knew loyalty meant wealth. Disobedience meant consequences. He built a vast network of corruption that stretched from the streets of Medellin to the highest offices of the Colombian government. But how did he do it? Police officers, given weekly cash payments, entire precincts were on his payroll. Some even moonlighted as his hitmen. Judges and prosecutors, if they dismissed cases against his cartel, they received deposits in offshore accounts. If they refused, they disappeared. Politicians, Escobar funded election campaigns. In exchange, they blocked extradition laws, keeping him safe from the US. Military officials, he supplied them with money, new weapons, and even housing for their families, all to ensure that when the government sent troops after him, they always missed their target. It wasn't just bribery, it was strategic control. By the mid-1980s, Pablo Escobar wasn't just running the Medellin cartel, he was running Colombia. Escobar didn't just want to be feared, he wanted to be loved. He knew that a dictator rules by force, but a king rules by loyalty. He understood that as long as the poor saw him as their protector, the government could never touch him. So he launched one of the most brilliant PR campaigns in history. He became a man of the people. Escobar's charity projects include housing projects, where he built thousands of homes in the poorest areas of Medellin. Entire neighborhoods were renamed in his honor. Food programs. During Christmas, he personally handed out gifts and food to starving families. Schools and hospitals. Funded the construction of clinics, libraries and sports fields in slums where the government refused to invest. Jobs. He gave work to thousands of unemployed men, not just in the cartel but in construction, transportation, and security. But was it real charity, or just another tactic? Some people genuinely believed Escobar cared about them. Others knew it was all part of his strategy, but they didn't care. He helped them when the government never did. To the wealthy elite, he was a monster. To the people of the slums, he was a savior. Escobar wasn't just building houses, he was buying loyalty. The proof: when police came looking for him, the people of Medellin would warn him first. When the government declared war on him, entire communities defended him. Even when he was on the run, there were families willing to hide him, just because of what he had done for them. Escobar didn't just control Colombia with fear, he controlled it with love. And that made him more dangerous than any other criminal in history. By the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar wasn't just the wealthiest man in Colombia. He was its most influential figure. He had bribed judges, funded hospitals, and built entire neighborhoods for the poor. He was seen as a modern-day Robin Hood, a man who gave back to those abandoned by the government. His wealth had made him untouchable. But he didn't just want wealth, he wanted legitimacy. He didn't want to be seen as a criminal. He wanted to be seen as a leader. He didn't want to hide in the shadows. He wanted to sit among Colombia's most powerful politicians. And in 1982, he made his first real move. Using his fortune, Escobar funded local politicians, paid for election campaigns, and made powerful allies. He launched a massive PR campaign, using his Robin Hood image to gain public support. He entered the race for the Chamber of Representatives, and he won. The message was clear. Escobar wasn't just a drug lord, he was now a politician. The poor loved him. They saw him as a man who cared more about them than the government ever had. The political elite despised him. To them, he was a criminal who had bought his way into power. The US was horrified because Escobar's new position gave him political protection against extradition. For a brief moment, it looked like Pablo Escobar had done the impossible. He had made himself untouchable. But then, he made a fatal mistake. For years, Colombia's political elite had tolerated Escobar's rise to power. They feared him. They avoided conflict with him. They knew he had more money than the government itself. But one man refused to stay silent. Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, Colombia's Minister of Justice. He openly condemned Escobar, calling him a criminal in public speeches. He demanded an investigation into Escobar's wealth, exposing his links to the drug trade. He pushed for extradition laws, arguing that Escobar should be sent to the US for trial. Escobar's response: ruthless and immediate. A secret meeting was called, the order was given. Lara Bonilla was marked for elimination. April 30th, 1984. The assassination. Lara Bonilla was driving home from work in his armoured Mercedes. As he stopped at a traffic light, 2 motorcycles pulled up beside him. Gunmen opened fire with submachine guns, riddling the car with bullets. His driver and bodyguard barely survived, but Lara Bonilla was gone. Colombia's government had been ignoring Escobar for years, but this was different. Lara Bonilla wasn't just another official, he was the Minister of Justice. This wasn't just a crime, this was an attack on the government itself. Escobar had crossed the line, and now Colombia had no choice but to fight back. President Belisario Betancourt publicly declared Escobar an enemy of the state. Colombia froze Escobar's assets, raiding cartel properties across the country. The US demanded extradition, offering full support to take Escobar down. For the first time, Colombian forces arrested cartel members. Escobar's empire was no longer untouchable. The Colombian government had declared war on Pablo Escobar, but what they didn't realize, Escobar was about to declare war on Colombia. The one thing Escobar feared wasn't prison, it was extradition. In Colombia, he could buy off judges, bribe police, and escape punishment. But in the US, his money meant nothing. If he was extradited, he would never see freedom again. So Escobar made a decision. If the government wanted war, he would give them war. In a secluded ranch outside Medellin, Escobar gathered the most powerful drug lords in Colombia. Carlos Lerda, Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, the Ochoa brothers, every major trafficker was there. The meeting wasn't about business, it was about survival. They declared that no Colombian drug lord would be sent to the US. They agreed to fight the government with every resource they had. Their motto? We prefer a tomb in Colombia over a prison in the US. The war had begun. Judges who signed extradition orders were assassinated. Journalists who wrote about the cartel were executed. Police officers who tried to fight back were bombed. Colombia was living in fear. Entire neighborhoods were controlled by Escobar's men. Government officials refused to leave their homes. The economy started to collapse as businesses fled the country. Pablo Escobar wasn't just a criminal anymore. He was an occupying force. There was no middle ground. You were either with Escobar or against him. If you worked for the government, you were a target. If you refused a bribe, you disappeared. If you spoke out against him, you didn't live long enough to regret it. Here are a few people that refused Escobar's bribes and paid the price. Judge Tulio Manuel Castro Gil, one of the few judges who refused to take Escobar's money, assassinated outside his home. His body was found with a note, plata o plomo, silver or lead. Luis Carlos Galan, a presidential candidate who openly called for Escobar's extradition. He was shot 11 times during a campaign rally, just before he was about to win the presidency. Guillermo Cano, editor of El Espectador, Colombia's most influential newspaper. He refused to stop publishing articles about Escobar's crimes. One night, as he left his office, gunmen sprayed his car with bullets. He never made it home. No one was safe. The Palace of Justice siege, 1985. In an attempt to destroy evidence against him, Escobar funded an attack on Colombia's Supreme Court. A guerrilla group called M19 stormed the building, taking justices hostage. The government responded with military force, resulting in a bloodbath. Half of Colombia's Supreme Court was wiped out. The message was clear: Escobar was more powerful than the law itself. Then, the Avianca Airlines bombing that occurred in 1989. Escobar learned that a presidential candidate was flying on Avianca Flight 203. He ordered a bomb placed on the plane, hoping to take him out. The explosion killed all 107 people on board. The target wasn't even on the flight. He didn't care. He wanted to send a message. The bombing of DAS headquarters, 1989. The DAS, Colombian intelligence agency, was investigating Escobar. He retaliated by placing 1,100 pounds of explosives outside their headquarters. The explosion leveled the building, killing 52 people and injuring hundreds. By 1990, Escobar had pushed Colombia to the brink of collapse. The government, under intense pressure from the US, had no choice. They created a military task force, the Search Block, dedicated to one mission: hunt Pablo Escobar. But Escobar had one last trick up his sleeve. It's 1991, and the government was desperate. The war against Escobar was failing. Judges, politicians, and police were too afraid to fight him. He was still one step ahead at every turn, so the government did the unthinkable. They offered him a deal. It was political suicide, but they were running out of options. Their reasoning was that if Escobar was in prison, he couldn't orchestrate more attacks. The killings would stop, and political pressure from the US would ease. It would allow Colombia to regain a sense of stability, even if it meant keeping the devil in a gilded cage. But when word reached Washington that the Colombian government was negotiating with Escobar, the DEA was furious. They had spent years pouring resources into bringing him down, and now instead of extraditing him, Colombia was about to hand him a palace and call it a prison. The DEA tried everything to pressure Colombia into refusing the deal. They warned that giving in to Escobar would make him look even stronger in the eyes of his enemies. But the Colombian government, weakened and desperate, pushed forward anyway. When the deal was proposed to Escobar, he didn't beg for mercy. He demanded terms: no extradition, a prison of his own design, hand-selected guards loyal to him, not the government, the right to continue managing his business under the radar. He wasn't humbled by the negotiations. He saw them as proof of his dominance. He mocked the officials who approached him, laughing at their desperation. He pretended to accept imprisonment, while knowing full well he would never truly be a prisoner. And so, on June 19, 1991, Pablo Escobar walked into La Catedral, his own personal fortress, disguised as a jail. From the outside, La Catedral looked like a prison. High fences, guard towers, and armed security. But inside, it was a luxury retreat, a fully equipped nightclub where Escobar hosted extravagant parties, a soccer field where he invited professional players for private matches, a barbecue pit, and a kitchen staffed with gourmet chefs. It even had a waterfall, because Escobar needed a scenic view while serving time. The guards assigned to La Catedral were Escobar's personal soldiers. They answered only to him, not the Colombian government. They carried out his orders, ensuring his empire continued to run without interruption. And they allowed cartel leaders, politicians, and prostitutes to visit him freely. Escobar's daily life inside La Catedral was as good as it gets. Every morning, he would wake up at his leisure, eat a luxurious breakfast, and make phone calls to his cartel lieutenants. Throughout the day, he would review business operations, issuing orders to keep his billion-dollar empire running. He spent his afternoons playing soccer with professional athletes who were flown in just for him. By evening, the prison would transform into a nightclub, where Escobar would host parties attended by celebrities, politicians, and even beauty queens. It was everything but a punishment. But Escobar's arrogance was about to cost him everything. For months, the Colombian government had played along with the illusion that La Catedral was a legitimate prison. It was the only way they could justify their controversial deal with Pablo Escobar. They told the US he was under control, that the most dangerous man in the world had been contained. They told the Colombian people he was no longer a threat, that peace had been restored. They told themselves that sacrificing justice for stability was a necessary evil. But in reality, the government had lost control from the moment Escobar surrendered. La Catedral was never a prison. It was an empire. Escobar's cartel continued smuggling cocaine from within its walls, shipping tons of product every month. Then he made his biggest mistake. By 1992, Escobar's control over the Medellin cartel was slipping. His lieutenants had become restless, questioning his leadership. His enemies were getting bolder, seizing his lost territory. Then came the betrayal. Fernando Galeano and Gerardo Moncada, two of Escobar's most powerful cartel leaders, made a fatal mistake. They were handling large sums of cartel money, managing finances for the organization. Escobar suspected millions of dollars had gone missing, money he believed they had stolen. Instead of investigating or demanding it back, Escobar acted immediately. What happened next proved that he was no longer just a cartel leader. He was a mad king eliminating his own court. Escobar lured Galeano and Moncada to La Catedral under the pretense of a business discussion. He accused them of stealing, watching their reactions carefully. As soon as they protested, his men grabbed them, beating them mercilessly right in front of him. Escobar didn't just want them eliminated, he wanted to send a message. They were tortured for hours. Their screams echoed through the halls of La Catedral. Escobar reportedly watched with no emotion, sipping whiskey. When he finally gave the order, their bodies were burned and disposed of. That was the moment everything changed. At this point, the government could no longer ignore the obvious. For years, the Colombian government had looked the other way when it came to Escobar's influence. But now, there was no way to cover this up. Two high-profile cartel members had just vanished inside a government-sanctioned facility. The families of the victims were demanding answers. And the worst part? The US had found out. Pressure from Washington was immediate and aggressive. DEA officials were furious, calling the entire La Catedral deal a national embarrassment. US lawmakers threatened to cut off aid to Colombia if they continued protecting Escobar. President Gaviria's administration was in crisis. If they didn't act now, they risked looking completely powerless. For the first time in years, Pablo Escobar was no longer the one making the rules. So the Colombian government made a bold and unprecedented announcement. Escobar would be transferred to a real prison, one where he had no control. The government would seize his assets, cutting off his financial empire. They would work with the US to ensure he could never manipulate the system again. For the first time, the government was making a real move against Escobar. The world waited to see what would happen next. Would Escobar surrender again, or would he retaliate? The answer came in the most shocking way possible. July 22nd, 1992. The night of the escape. The Colombian government thought they had outsmarted Escobar. They mobilized elite special forces. They surrounded La Catedral, preparing to take him into custody. But when they stormed the prison, Escobar was gone. His top bodyguards had vanished with him. The most wanted man in the world had just disappeared. Again. How did he do it? Escobar had planned his escape months in advance. He had ordered the construction of a secret tunnel, leading directly into the surrounding jungle. He used his connections to ensure that government officials wouldn't interfere. By the time soldiers entered La Catedral, Escobar was already miles away. He had fooled the entire Colombian government. Again, he had escaped the most secure location he himself had designed. He was free. And now, more dangerous than ever. The largest manhunt in history had begun. For 16 months, Pablo Escobar was no longer the king of Colombia. He was a fugitive, a man running from a country that had once bowed at his feet. His network of influence was collapsing. His once loyal allies were betraying him. His enemies weren't just watching, they were actively hunting him. For the first time in his life, Escobar was the one being chased. But this wasn't a normal manhunt. The people coming after him weren't just local police officers. The Colombian government had deployed Search Block, a US-trained military strike force dedicated to one mission: eliminate Escobar. The DEA was providing intelligence, surveillance and funding, ensuring Escobar had nowhere left to hide. The Cali cartel, his biggest rivals, had secretly funded a vigilante group called Los Pepes, a death squad eliminating his associates one by one. For the first time in history, an entire country, its most dangerous criminal rivals, and the most powerful anti-drug agency in the world were all working together. Escobar once believed he was invincible, but in 1992, everything changed. His bank accounts were being seized, his mansions were being raided, his family was under government protection, completely cut off from him. His empire was crumbling. And worse, Los Pepes were dismantling his entire operation. Los Pepes wasn't a normal cartel hit squad. They were methodical, targeting anyone who had ever worked with Escobar. They assassinated lawyers, accountants and informants, one by one. Imagine waking up every morning to see another one of your closest allies missing or dead. Los Pepes didn't just want Escobar dead, they wanted to erase his entire legacy. They burned down his properties, destroyed his assets, and took out anyone who had ever benefited from him. They posted warnings across Medellin, signs with names of his remaining allies, promising they were next. For the first time in his life, Pablo Escobar had nowhere left to run, and he was terrified. He ditched his expensive suits for disguises, dressing like a common man. He constantly moved between random safe houses, never staying in one place for long. He avoided using electronic devices, knowing the DEA was tracking every call. But there was one thing he couldn't avoid: his growing paranoia. He refused to trust even his closest allies. He executed people just for looking suspicious. But it all came to an end on December 2nd, 1993. Escobar had been in hiding for over a year. He was staying in a small, run-down house in his hometown of Medellin. He had only one bodyguard left. He was weaker than ever. Then he made the call that ended it all. He called his son, Juan Pablo, on a landline. He spoke for several minutes. But what he didn't realize was that Colombian intelligence was tracking the call. Within minutes, Search Block had his exact location. They moved in immediately. Escobar and his last bodyguard tried to escape across the rooftops, but they were outgunned, outnumbered, and cornered. Bullets tore through the walls, the rooftop, and Escobar's hiding spot. And then, it was over. A final bullet struck Pablo Escobar. The most powerful drug lord in history was gone. The king had fallen. The moment Pablo Escobar fell, everything changed. For over a decade, he had been the undisputed king of the cocaine trade, controlling 80% of the world's supply, flooding the streets of America with drugs, and holding an entire nation hostage with fear. But with a single bullet, his empire crumbled. Even in death, Escobar refused to disappear. In the same streets he once terrorized, murals of his face still remain. Tourists visit his grave, taking pictures as if he were a fallen revolutionary. Some still call him a modern-day Robin Hood, a man who gave back to the poor. But he also left behind a trail of devastation. Thousands were killed. Judges, journalists, police officers, entire families were wiped out just because they opposed him. Colombia spent years recovering from the chaos he created. In the end, Pablo Escobar wasn't just a drug lord. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was the man who almost took over an entire country and left the world forever changed. What if I told you there was another criminal organization that made even more money without ever stepping into the spotlight? Click the next video to uncover the untold story of the most profitable crime syndicates in history. You won't believe how far their influence reached.